I found out about Maya's law school graduation party the way most people learn about a sale they weren't invited to, through someone else's joy. I was scrolling through the family group chat when a burst of pictures popped in, one after another like fireworks I hadn't been warned about. First came the champagne tower, liquid gold spilling from the top flute in a cascade. Then the cake, three-tiered, marble fondant, with Esquire Maya Collins scripted in gold cursive that looked like it cost more than the last 3 months of our groceries combined. There were candid shots too, Maya in a fitted gold gown, arms around people I'd never seen, laughing like she'd already made it. Not a trace of me anywhere. At first, I thought maybe there had been some mistake. That's the cruel thing about hope. It clings even when you're holding a dagger. I scrolled back up. No text, no call, no personal message. Just snapshots from a celebration I didn't know was happening. I stared at the screen, that heavy feeling pooling in my chest like cold oil. I'd been covering $950 of her rent every month for nearly 3 years, sent in over $5,000 every term for her tuition and supplies. And I wasn't even worth a courtesy text? Not even an "I wish you could be here." I told myself there had to be some oversight. Maybe she thought I was working. Maybe she tried to surprise me. Maybe. That word kept me moving. Maybe was the only reason I ironed my shirt and showed up anyway. The venue was a rental hall draped in white linen and gold trim. From the outside, it looked like something out of a bridal magazine. A white Bentley sat parked near the entrance like a paid prop. I walked up slowly, watching as strangers in tuxedos and shimmering dresses walked and laughing, as if they knew exactly where they belonged. I didn't see Maya at first, just more photos being snapped, more champagne being poured. Everything about it screamed curated perfection, like the kind of life Maya had always hinted she deserved. The kind I was supposed to provide. Still, I pushed open the door. The scent of roses and catered lamb hit me first, followed by the music, some soft jazz mix that didn't match the volume of the chatter. I stood there, half in, half out, unsure if I should take another step or turn back. Then I saw her. She was radiant, I'll give her that. Hair styled into soft waves, makeup flawless, that golden dress hugging every curve like a designer's final sketch. She was holding a glass of champagne, laughing with someone who looked like a lawyer already. Gray temples, sharp eyes, expensive cufflinks. She saw me and blinked. Once, like she was trying to compute how I'd found her. Her father, Franklin, was nearby, hands clasped behind his back like he owned the building. He didn't even pretend to hide the smirk when his eyes met mine. I hadn't seen Jeanette yet, but I could feel her presence. The kind of woman who watched you like a security camera, always recording, never blinking. Uncle Terrence was by the bar, already 3 drinks in from the way his voice carried, and somewhere near the dessert table was Cousin Rhea, watching me like she was expecting this exact moment. I thought Maya might come to me, say something, anything. But she turned away, laughed, clinked her glass with someone else's. I stood there like a misplaced coat, waiting to be noticed. Then I saw it, on the far end of the room, just before the arch of flowers. The cake. Esquire Maya Collins. Gold foil letters. No space for a husband's name. Not even a mention. It hit me harder than I expected. Not just the omission, but the intention behind it. This wasn't just forgetting to invite me. This was deliberate. This was a curated life with all the frayed edges tucked away. And I was the edge. Still, I stayed longer than I should have. Watch them dance. Watch them toast. Someone said, to Maya and her future. Another said, she did it all on her own. I nearly laughed. I thought about every night I worked overtime, every skipped meal, every late bill just to make sure her tuition went through. But none of that mattered here. Here, I was invisible. I didn't make a scene. I didn't tap a fork against glass and announce who I was. I just left. Quietly. Back through the floral archway. Back into the night that suddenly felt colder. The drive home was a blur of taillights and questions I knew would never be answered. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was this ache, deep and tired. Like the ache that settles in your bones when you've been standing too long in the wrong place, waiting for someone to notice. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't text her. I didn't call. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes, still slightly scuffed despite the polish. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and I had finally read it. I didn't sleep much that night. Sleep felt like a reward for the emotionally intact. I just lay there, my mind spinning between shame and resolve. The humiliation clung to my skin like cheap cologne, and no amount of pacing or deep breaths washed it off. By morning, I still hadn't received a call, a text, or even a pity emoji from Maya. Nothing. But I still needed answers. Closure, if that even applied to a man discarded like junk mail. So I decided to go back. Not for drama. Not to argue. Just to look her in the eye and see if she could tell me to my face that I didn't matter. I put on a clean white shirt, pressed it the best I could, and stepped into my most presentable pair of shoes. They were worn, sure. A little frayed at the edges. But they had walked me through years of sacrifice, each crease earned, not inherited. I stood in the mirror for a moment and gave myself one last look. Not flashy, not broke. Just real. Something that party had no use for. When I got to the venue, the morning sun hadn't even burned off the night's chill. Most of the guests had likely already returned to their condos and curated lives. But a few people were still hanging around. Event staff cleaning up, caterers hauling trays, security standing idle but alert. I walked up to the main entrance with a calm I didn't entirely believe in and nodded at the nearest guard. I'm here to see Maya Collins. I'm her husband. He didn't move, just tilted his head slightly and narrowed his eyes like I'd spoken another language. Then he turned to another guard, a younger man with a clipboard and an earpiece, and murmured something. Clipboard guy looked me up and down, then walked off into the building. I waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. I could feel eyes on me. The cleanup crew whispering. I was dressed too plain to be a guest, too determined to be ignored. Then the glass doors swung open. Maya walked out first, her expression unreadable. Behind her was her father, Franklin, moving like a man eager for confrontation. He had that same smug posture he always carried around me. Shoulders pulled back like his money gave him extra spine. Maya didn't say hi, didn't ask how I was. She didn't even ask why I came. She simply said, "He doesn't belong here." Just like that. Like I was some drifter off the street trying to sneak into a members-only club. I stared at her, searching her face for some crack, some flicker of regret or uncertainty. There was none. She looked past me, like I wasn't even human. Franklin, though, he grinned. "You really thought you were welcome?" he asked, his voice laced with condescension so thick it could choke. I wanted to reply. 1,000 words flashed through my mind, some poetic, some profane. But I just stood there, too tired to engage in their performance. I turned to Maya and held her gaze. "Okay," I said, not out of defeat, out of clarity. If she could look at me like that, here, after everything, we were done pretending. Then I turned and walked away. There was no dramatic music, no slow clap, no lightning bolt of vindication. Just the sound of my footsteps on the pavement and the echo of her silence. But even that silence was louder than anything she'd ever said to me in private. She didn't chase after me, didn't explain, didn't even blink. She let me go with the same ease she'd let me fund her life. By the time I got home, the numbness had hardened into something colder. I unlocked the door, stepped into the stillness of my one-bedroom apartment, and didn't bother to take off my shoes. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and opened our message thread. There were no unread messages, just a string of older texts, me asking about her classes, her schedule, whether she needed help with anything. Most went unanswered or got the typical, "I'm busy, babe. Love you, though." I stared at the blank text bar for a long time. Then I typed exactly what needed to be said. "Starting next month, you'll be paying your own rent. Best of luck." I hit send. There was no firework inside me, no sense of reclaiming my power. Just a quiet weight lifting. The kind of relief that comes from setting something heavy down, not because you're done carrying it, but because you finally realize you never had to. I turned off my phone. No need to watch her scramble or respond with those manipulative little half-apologies she always used when things got tight. "You know how law school is," she'd say. Or, "You're the only one I can count on." Not anymore. Let her count someone else. Let her count her own dollars, her own debts, her own regrets. Tonight, for the first time in years, I would only be paying one person's bills, mine. It was almost noon when the knock came. I was sitting on the couch, half-dressed, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I took my second sip. I hadn't turned the lights on. The sunlight spilling through the window was enough, bare, honest, unfiltered. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of the people who knew where I lived didn't bother showing up uninvited. Except one. I opened the door, and there she was, Maya. Still in the same gold dress from the party, but the glow was gone. Her hair was matted to one side, and her mascara had left streaks like black rivers down her cheeks. Her voice wavered. Please, don't do this. No preamble. No apology. Just desperation wearing high heels. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. I didn't stop her. Maybe part of me still needed to hear her out, needed to give her that last chance to say something, anything, that would make it make sense. She sat on the edge of the couch like a guest, careful not to wrinkle the dress, even now. That told me more than I needed to know. You know I can't afford it right now, she said, fingers twisted in her lap. The exams, the legal aid clinic night shifts, it's been brutal. I've been trying to keep everything together. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, letting her talk. She was always good at filling the air with just enough emotion to make you second-guess your instincts. She talked about being exhausted, about juggling cases and coursework, about the pressure of being a black woman in law school where nobody expected her to win. She said, "You've always been my rock." She said, "You don't understand what it's like." I let her say all of it. Every last line. I didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't even blink. When she was finished, I asked just one question. Why weren't your grandparents at the party? The silence that followed hit harder than anything she'd said. Her eyes widened, just slightly, and her mouth opened without sound. I repeated it, slow, measured. Your grandparents. Where were they? She looked away. Her voice dropped. Mom didn't want them stealing attention. And that was it. That was the sentence that turned everything from confusion into clarity. She hadn't just excluded me. She'd excluded them too. The people who raised her when her mom couldn't, who stood at every middle school spelling bee, who scraped together money when she needed textbooks. And why? Because they might steal attention? That's when it all clicked. This wasn't about forgetting me. This was about control. It was about the image she wanted to present. And anyone who didn't fit neatly into her curated display, me, her grandparents, anyone too real, was pushed off stage like furniture after a dress rehearsal. I took a breath. So we're all disposable, huh? Just props until the photos get taken? Her face tightened. It's not like that. No? Then what is it like, Maya? Enlighten me. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. But you did. I didn't think you'd show. I almost laughed. So that makes it better? That makes it okay. No. But I was scared you'd embarrass me. You always say things. You don't fit. And there it was. The truth she couldn't unsay. I didn't fit. Not her image. Not her idea of success. Not her law school aesthetic or her father's expectations. Not the life she built in her head where she wore gold gowns and took pictures with people who used the word network as a verb. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't break anything. I just stood still and let it wash over me like cold rain. I paid for that apartment, I said quietly. I paid for those textbooks. For the new tires on your car. For the groceries you never stocked. You're walking around in a dress that probably cost more than our entire first vacation, and you couldn't even send me a text. She wiped her face, but the mascara only smeared more. I made a mistake. I nodded. Yeah, you did. She looked up, her voice suddenly soft. So what now? I thought about it. About all the times I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. About every holiday I'd spent at her parents' table pretending not to hear the jabs. About how many nights I went to bed wondering if I was doing enough for her, for us. I walked to the door and opened it. You figure that out, I said. You're the lawyer now. She didn't move. Please, just tell me you don't hate me. I shook my head. I don't hate you, Maya. I just don't trust you. She stood up slowly, like her body weighed more than it used to. Maybe it did. Guilt is heavier than gold. She stepped outside, pausing in the hallway. You said you were my rock. Rocks don't move, I replied. I finally did. Then I closed the door. And for the first time since that damned group chat lit up my screen, I actually exhaled. I didn't wait for Maya to text back. I didn't check to see if she cried again or if she made it home in that glittery dress with her pride in a pile on the floorboard. None of that mattered anymore. What did matter, what finally clicked in my bones, was that I didn't owe her. Not anymore. Not one more dollar. Not one more ounce of grace. Not one more version of myself that twisted to fit her reflection. So I called Franklin. He answered on the second ring, like he was waiting on the other end. I could hear the smug in his breath before he even spoke. Didn't expect to hear from you again. You will now, I said. I'm calling to make this crystal clear. I'm done. A pause. Done with what? He asked, but I could hear the shift in his tone. He knew exactly what. No more rent. No more tuition help. No more covering for Maya when she overspins and lies about it. I'm done funding your daughter's fantasy life. Franklin scoffed. Oh, come on now. Don't be dramatic. You don't have kids. No mortgage. You can afford it. That line hit like a cold slap. I can afford it, I repeated, because I didn't screw up my life pretending to be someone I'm not. That doesn't make me your ATM. You married her, he said casually, as if that alone justified everything. I married her, I said. But I didn't sign up to be the invisible sponsor of your family's image campaign. Franklin chuckled. You're being emotional. No, I said calmly. I'm being finished. Then I hung up. I didn't wait for a reply. Didn't give him room to manipulate the conversation the way he always did, turning logic into guilt, silence into obligation. I wasn't that man anymore. 20 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. At first, I didn't move. Thought it might be Maya again, trying one more time to spin the wheel. But when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't her. It was Rhea. She stood there in black joggers and a hoodie, phone in one hand, backpack slung over one shoulder. No makeup. No pretense. I opened the door, still cautious. You all right? I asked. She nodded, but her eyes were stormy. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She walked in and sat down like she'd done it 100 times, though this was only the second time she'd ever been in my space. The first was a Thanksgiving when Maya insisted we host. Rhea was the only one who helped with dishes. She pulled out her phone and opened something. I need you to see this. What is it? She turned the screen to me. A private group chat. Not the one Maya had with the family. Not the one I was in. This one was different, just Maya and a few of her close friends. The ones who called me the quiet one when they met me. The ones who toasted Maya's graduation without ever asking who paid for her cap and gown. The messages were there in plain text. He still thinks I married him for love. He's my ATM with a wedding ring. He showed up like a puppy begging for scraps. God, it was so awkward. Franklin wanted to have security remove him sooner. I read them all. Every line. My hands didn't shake. My throat didn't close. There was just a quiet sort of finality, like hearing the last brick slide into place on a tomb. I looked up at Rhea. Why are you showing me this? Her voice was soft, tired. Because I'm tired of being quiet. I blinked. Of all the people, she was the one who saw it. She's always been like this, Rhea added. But she used to have lines she wouldn't cross. Now? It's all performance. All manipulation. I didn't speak for a while. I just nodded, slowly, then reached for my own phone. Opened the family group chat. No caption. No warning. I posted the screenshots. Then I typed one line. Let me show you what your perfect daughter really thinks of me. And I hit send. A flood of scene ticks appeared. Then silence. No one defended her. No one offered excuses. Aunt Clarice quietly left the chat. Franklin didn't type a word. Jeanette went offline. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. And maybe, for once, the truth got to take center stage. Rhea stood and slipped her phone back into her pocket. I should go. I've already pissed off half the family by just being here. You good? I asked. She nodded. Yeah. I just needed you to know. You weren't crazy. You weren't alone. I walked her to the door. Just before she stepped out, she turned back. For what it's worth, you were too good for her. Some of us saw it. We just didn't say anything. Thanks, I said. Next time, say it sooner. She smiled, small and sad. Next time. And then she was gone. After Rhea left, the apartment settled into a silence so thick I could almost hear it breathing. The kind of silence that follows a storm, not because the damage is done, but because no one's sure where to begin cleaning up. I stood in the middle of the living room, phone still in hand, rereading the screenshots I'd posted. I hadn't added commentary, hadn't stirred the pot beyond that one line. Let me show you what your perfect daughter really thinks of me. That was all it took. Within minutes of sending it, the group chat had gone quiet like a tomb. I could see they were reading it. Franklin, Jeanette, Uncle Terrence. Even the ones who barely interacted, like Maya's older cousin Deborah from Atlanta, or her church friend Clara who never liked me but smiled through her teeth. All of them had seen the post. But no one typed. No one responded. No one defended her. Then I saw it, Aunt Clarice, the family's so-called moral compass, left the chat without a word. That said everything. I tossed the phone onto the couch and sat down beside it, elbows resting on my knees. There wasn't any joy in it. No sense of triumph or vindication. Just the slow, aching confirmation that I had been the only one pretending things were fine. Maya had been living in her own scripted narrative, and I'd been nothing more than a placeholder character, good for bills, background support, and clean credit. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. All the little moments started replaying now with brutal clarity. Like the time I offered to cook for her study group, and she told me not to bother, that they'd just grab something out. Or when she told her friends I was in tech, instead of admitting I worked retail IT, like the truth was something to be polished before it could be presented. I had ignored so many signs. Love does that. It makes excuses before you even open your mouth. I closed my eyes for what felt like a second but must have been longer because the buzz of a message pulled me back. It was Calvin. Yo, that post was real. Calvin was my coworker. We weren't best friends, but he was solid. A good man. Showed up when he said he would. Checked in when no one else did. Yeah, every word. Damn. You okay? Getting there. He didn't push. Just sent a thumbs up and the praying hands emoji. It was more than Maya's entire family had managed to say. I put the phone on silent and got up to grab water, my throat suddenly dry. As I turned on the tap, a quiet knock sounded from the door. I froze. A small part of me hoped it was Calvin or maybe Rhea again. But when I opened it, there was no familiar face. Just a stranger, mid-30s, buzz-cut, blue security uniform with a stitched name tag, Mr. Graves. He held a manila envelope in one hand. Evening, he said with a nod. You Lewis? Yeah. He handed me the envelope. This was dropped off at the front desk. I was told to make sure you got it directly. I took it slowly, confused. By who? He gave a half smile. Didn't say. Just told me it's better if you read it in private. I thanked him and shut the door, envelope still warm in my hands. My name was scribbled on the front in Maya's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, If you wanted to destroy me, you're doing a great job. But you don't know everything. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone on your side is being honest. No greeting. No apology. Just a warning laced in bitterness. Classic Maya, always playing defense even when she was clearly in the wrong. But it wasn't her handwriting that bothered me. It was the line, not everyone on your side is being honest. I sat down again and stared at the paper. Was she bluffing? Or was this her last-ditch effort to sow doubt? Either way, it didn't change what I knew to be true. Maya had lied. She had mocked me behind my back. She had used my money, my time, and my presence to build her illusion, and discarded me the second I no longer fit the image. And now that I'd exposed it, she was lashing out. But the damage had already been done. I picked up my phone again and reread Rhea's messages, the timestamps, the blunt truth she handed me without fanfare. I trusted that. Not because I wanted to, but because she had nothing to gain. And that's what made the difference. Maya's life had become a web of gain. Transaction over truth. Appearances over accountability. And now the mask had cracked. Badly. Let them deal with the shards. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not Calvin. Not Rhea. Not even my neighbor who usually gave a nod any time I passed his door. I didn't want backup or witnesses or a phone recording in my pocket. I wanted clarity. One-on-one. Face-to-face. No more middlemen. No more messages. The drive to the Collins house was long enough to doubt myself and short enough not to talk myself out of it. Their neighborhood looked the same, pristine hedges, pale driveways, silent wind chimes barely moving. A place where the problems were hidden behind tasteful drapery and security systems. I pulled up to the same house I used to visit with wine or baked goods in hand, trying too hard to earn favor I'd never be granted. This time I brought nothing. I knocked once. Jeanette opened the door like she'd been expecting the moment all morning. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes didn't flinch. She didn't offer a greeting or an invitation, just a step backward, enough room to pass, not enough warmth to call it welcome. Franklin was already in the living room, seated like a king in his leather recliner, a wine glass in hand that was more accessory than necessity. He didn't stand. Didn't look surprised either. The man was ready for a confrontation. He just thought he'd win it by sitting down. Maya's not here, Jeanette said. Once I stepped in, I didn't come for her. The silence that followed was thick, like the walls themselves were waiting to eavesdrop. I stayed standing. Franklin took a slow sip and arched an eyebrow, like he expected a performance. I came to say what I should have said a long time ago, I began. My voice wasn't loud. I wasn't angry. Just tired and finally clear. I was good to this family. Even when I wasn't wanted, I showed up. I paid for things I couldn't afford, stayed quiet when I was disrespected, and carried the weight of Maya's dreams like they were mine. And the second it was time for her to stand in the light, I was treated like a stain on her dress. Franklin chuckled, dry and without humor. You're feeling sorry for yourself? No, I said. I'm feeling done. Jeanette's lips parted like she might say something, but I cut in before she had the chance. I kept my mouth shut every Thanksgiving when Uncle Terrence cracked jokes about men who let women go to school on their dime. I kept quiet when I looked directly at Franklin, called me a stepping stone, under your breath when you thought I couldn't hear. I smiled through every sideways comment, every passive insult dressed as advice. Franklin's face didn't change. He was good at that, sitting behind his money like it was a shield. You're emotional, he said again, as if the repetition would make it a fact. I'm observant, I corrected. And I'm no longer for sale. Jeanette sat down finally, on the edge of the cream-colored couch she always protected with throw pillows that never got touched. What do you want, Louis? I don't want anything. That's the point. I'm not here to beg for acknowledgement or fight for a seat at a table that was never mine. I'm here to tell you that I see you now. All of you. Franklin tapped his glass. So what? You're just going to post our family business online and call it justice? I didn't post your family business, I said. I posted mine. The part of it you pretended didn't exist. No names. No locations. Just truth. His eyes narrowed slightly. I could tell that bothered him more than anything. Losing control of the narrative. The Collins brand wasn't supposed to be messy, and now it was smeared across Reddit and whispers. I spent years thinking if I was just patient enough, generous enough, helpful enough, you'd accept me. But I finally get it. You didn't want a husband for Maya. You wanted a silent sponsor. And now that I'm done paying, I've also stopped pretending. Jeanette glanced down, hands tightening in her lap. Maybe guilt. Maybe embarrassment. Or maybe she was just rehearsing what to say to the next guest who asked why Maya's husband wasn't in the pictures. I wish it had gone differently, she said quietly. I gave a small nod. Me too. But wishes don't fix things. Truth does. I turned toward the door. Before I stepped out, I added one last thing. People are reading that post. And they're sharing it. Because too many of us are told to just be grateful, to smile and stay quiet. To let people treat us like background characters in their success story. I was never asking for applause. Just respect. Franklin didn't move. Jeanette didn't follow. And for once, I didn't look back to check. Outside, the sun was sharp against the windshield. I slid behind the wheel, breathing easier than I had in days. Not because they understood me, but because I had finally stopped needing them to. I didn't expect the post to go viral. I thought maybe it'd get a few likes. A handful of comments from strangers who'd been through something similar. Maybe a repost or two from someone stuck in the same cycle of quiet sacrifice. But by the time I'd driven back from the Collins house and finally checked my phone, the notifications were endless. Hundreds of comments. Thousands of likes. Shares climbing by the second. And the DMs. People pouring out stories like they'd been waiting for someone to say it first. I read them slowly, one by one, sitting on the edge of my bed like I wasn't sure if I should feel vindicated or just sad. The usernames blurred together after a while, but the words stuck. Messages like, my ex did the same thing. Used me like a ladder, then pretended I never existed. This hit me hard. I was the stepping stone, too. You're not alone. Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't. A few people were angry for me, raging on my behalf like I hadn't even allowed myself to. Others just related. Quietly. Honestly. People who had played supporting roles in lives they'd funded, raised, held up, and then been written out of the credits when the spotlight came. But one comment stopped me cold. It was buried in the thread, just above someone tagging a friend. It read, I know her. Maya Collins. She used to joke that her husband was her scholarship fund. Said she married smart, not for love. That was it. No profile picture. No further detail. But I knew it was real. I didn't even need to verify. Something about the bluntness, the familiarity in the phrasing, her scholarship fund, it fit. Fit too well. I sat there for a long time, the screen burning against my palm. I wasn't hurt. Not anymore. That part of me had already been torn out and cauterized. This was different. This was confirmation. I closed the app and stared at the wall. The same beige paint I'd been meaning to repaint for years. I thought about all the things I had delayed for Maya. Buying a new mattress. Taking a solo trip. Re-enrolling in that online coding course. Every time I'd said, after her finals, or once the rent clears, or maybe when she's settled. But now I had room. Now I had space. That night, I called Grandma Nadine. She wasn't on social media. She didn't even text. But she always picked up the phone, even if her voice was slow and scratchy from sleep. "Hey, baby," she said, warmth already in her tone. "You all right?" I didn't even have to explain. She'd heard the shift in my voice. "Just processing," I said. "It's been a long week." "You eat." "Trying." "You working too hard again?" I smiled. "Not this time." I told her everything. About the party, the exclusion, the screenshots, the post, the stranger who confirmed what I'd always suspected but never wanted to believe. I didn't cry, but my voice did tremble once when I told her how I stood in that hall like a ghost at my own wife's celebration. She let the silence sit for a while before she responded. "You didn't fail, Lewis. You were just honest in a room full of performers. That's not weakness. That's clarity." I felt something loosen in my chest. I just thought, if I was good enough, they'd see me. "They did see you," she said. "And that scared them. Because you're the kind of man that reminds people of what they're pretending not to be: humble, steady, real." They dressed it up as embarrassment, but what they really felt was fear. That landed. I closed my eyes, letting her words root themselves where all the insults used to live. Her voice, soft but unwavering, became a balm to all the jagged pieces I'd carried around too long. "You've been honest," she said again. "That's more than they ever were. Let them sit in the lie." I thanked her, told her I loved her, and promised to visit soon. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel broken. I just felt clean. I opened the windows that night, even though it was chilly. Let the air circulate, the weight of that house, that family, that version of me float out into the dark. I knew the post would live on. People would talk. Maya would likely rage. Franklin would call it slander. Jeanette might tell everyone I was unstable, dramatic, cruel. But the truth was out, and I wasn't hiding anymore. The mask had broken. Not mine. Theirs. I was standing in the checkout line of the local grocery store, debating between spending the extra $2 on real orange juice or settling for the off-brand when I felt a presence behind me. Too close to be casual. I turned halfway, expecting a stranger impatient with the line or someone who needed to squeeze past. But it was Leon. Leon Collins. Maya's cousin. The quiet one. He barely spoke at family functions and only ever nodded when we passed each other. He always struck me as the type who watched more than he talked. I hadn't seen him since Thanksgiving 2 years ago when he handed me a plate and didn't say a word. Now here he was in a hoodie, cargo pants, and dusty sneakers, holding a small plastic bag like it weighed something heavier than food. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Can I talk to you outside?" I nodded, grabbed my bag off the counter, and followed him out into the brisk evening air. The sun had dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in tired shades of orange and gray. We stood near the carts. He didn't speak right away, just looked down at the bag in his hand. "I saw the post," he finally said. I didn't say anything. I'd gotten that sentence a lot lately, from coworkers, from old classmates, from strangers online. But this was different. This came from someone who had been in the background of it all. He handed me the plastic bag. I peeked inside. There was a sandwich wrapped in foil, 3 $20 bills folded neatly, and a crumpled napkin. No note. Just that. "One meal for each time I stood by while they disrespected you," he said. My fingers tightened around the plastic. Not out of anger, just to ground myself. I wasn't expecting this. Not from him. I didn't laugh, he said quickly. When they joked, I didn't join in, but I didn't stop it either. And that's the same thing. I looked at him, trying to find the cracks in his apology. There weren't any. He looked ashamed but firm. Not performative. Not looking for forgiveness. Just showing up. "I never knew what to say," he added. "They act like if you're not loud, you're not loyal." I didn't have it in me to fight them, but I read what you wrote, and I saw the screenshots. It changed something. I nodded slowly. "Thanks," I said, and meant it. Not because I needed the sandwich. Not even because of the money. It was the gesture. The acknowledgement. That quiet, simple admission. "You were wronged. I saw it, and I'm sorry. You don't owe me anything," I said. He shook his head. "I know, but I owed me this." I didn't want to stay silent anymore. A small breeze passed between us. The kind that comes with the early promise of winter. He looked around the parking lot like he wasn't sure what else to say. Then, before he turned to leave, he added, "You were always better than how they treated you. I don't know if anyone else will say that, but it's true." Then he walked off. No dramatic goodbye. Just a man who did something hard and walked away from it a little lighter. I stood there for a while, holding the bag. Maybe not every relative had to go. Maybe it wasn't about burning every bridge, just making sure I never tried to cross the rotten ones again. When I got home, I set the bag on the counter and unwrapped the sandwich. Turkey and Swiss on wheat. Simple. Unassuming. No mustard, exactly how I liked it. He remembered. Or maybe he asked. Either way, it mattered. I sat at the table and ate it slowly, letting the quiet wrap around me. There was no music playing. No television humming in the background. Just the soft sound of chewing and the steady rhythm of my breath. That was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Not even when things were good with Maya. There had always been noise with her, expectation, judgment, the pressure to be shinier than I was. But this was mine. That night, I didn't scroll through the comments on my post. I didn't check for reactions or replies. I just wrote a message to myself in my journal app. Not everyone is the enemy. But not everyone deserves a second chance either. I saved it and locked the screen. I wasn't planning to forgive Maya. I wasn't looking to rebuild anything with Franklin or Jeanette. But Leon, he showed me that even in a forest of dead trees, something green could still break through the soil. It didn't mean I'd start showing up to family dinners again. It didn't mean I'd pretend nothing happened. But it meant I didn't have to carry it all as hate. Some things I could set down. Others, I'd keep my distance from. Always. I hadn't seen Quincy in years, not since the days when our biggest problems were busted sneakers and who had the highest score on NBA 2K. Life had a way of stretching friendships thin, sometimes until they snapped without anyone noticing. But every now and then, the right person resurfaces at the right time. And Quincy? He always had perfect timing. He texted me out of the blue. Saw your post, man. You good? I hesitated before replying. I'd grown tired of that question. Everyone asked if I was good, as if the answer could be measured on a scale from fine to falling apart. But Quincy wasn't just making conversation. He was checking in. Getting there. I sent back. Let's catch up. Burger spot. Our old one. You know the place. It was still there, Ray's Grill. Same chipped sign. Same rickety booth near the window that had probably been around since we were teenagers. When I pulled into the parking lot, Quincy was already waiting, leaning against his car with that lopsided grin that never changed. Look who it is, he said, pulling me into a quick hug. Mr. Viral. I shook my head. Don't start. Oh, I'm starting. Man, you broke the internet. We walked inside, the scent of grilled onions and grease wrapping around us like nostalgia. We grabbed our usual booth, his side always next to the window, mine across from the napkin dispenser. Muscle memory. We ordered 2 bacon cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes like we were still 17 with bottomless stomachs and no cholesterol concerns. Once the waitress left, Quincy leaned back and gave me a look. So, Maya. I took a breath. Yeah, that's over. He nodded slowly, then said, I figured. Anyone who calls her husband an ATM with a ring isn't exactly wife of the year material. I smirked. That part still surprises me. What? That she said it? No. That she meant it. We talked for a while. About the party. The exclusion. The silence that followed when I finally stood up for myself. He didn't interrupt. Didn't rush to throw in platitudes. He just listened, chin resting on his fist, eyes focused like I was saying something worth hearing. Man, he said eventually, I'm glad you're out of it. I watched you vanish over the years. Used to call, you'd say you were busy. Texts went unanswered. You were always tired. I thought maybe it was work, but it was the weight, I said, of carrying someone who didn't think I was worth standing next to. He let that hang in the air. It didn't need to be dressed up. The truth didn't need adjectives. Then we laughed. About old stuff. High school drama. The time we tried to fix his mom's old radio and nearly electrocuted ourselves. His first job at the movie theater where he snuck in popcorn for us during double features. We laughed like people who had nothing left to prove to each other. That's when I realized I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing or being judged or having to apologize for not being enough. Quincy saw me. Not the version I dressed up for Maya's family. Just me. We finished our food and sat in the afterglow of full stomachs and full conversation. Quincy reached for his wallet, but I waved him off. I got it. You sure? He asked, half joking. Didn't you used to have a tuition bill to cover? I laughed harder than I had in months. Not a polite chuckle. A real, belly-deep laugh that cracked open my chest like fresh air. Guess I finally graduated too, I said. He grinned. Welcome to the other side. We walked out into the night, and the cold air didn't bite the way it used to. Maybe because I wasn't dragging all that weight anymore. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Not Maya. Not Franklin. Not people who measured worth by dress codes and job titles. I looked up at the stars, quiet, distant, honest. For the first time in months, I felt human again. 2 days after dinner with Quincy, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, cursor blinking at the blank space and a follow-up post draft. I wasn't planning to write another one. I didn't want to be the guy whose whole personality online became the husband who got humiliated at a graduation party. But the truth is, that night, something had been turning in my chest. Not rage. Not regret. Just recognition. I'd been quiet for so long, not just with Maya but with the world. I'd let people shape the story around me. I played the role. The dependable one. The blessing Maya's family never asked for but happily used. I kept receipts. I held back. I hoped someone else would call things what they were. And then I realized no one was coming. No one was going to speak up on my behalf. So I started typing. I didn't begin with accusations. I didn't rehash the party or repost the screenshots. This one wasn't for them. This one was for me. I used to think I needed to be impressive to be respected. That if I dressed well enough, made enough, gave enough, I'd eventually be enough. But what I've learned is that some people will shrink you no matter how much you give, because your quiet dignity makes their performance feel hollow. I paused, let that truth settle. They treated me like I was the embarrassment. But the truth is, I was the mirror. And what they saw scared them. I kept writing. The words flowed easily now, not from a place of pain but from clarity. I wrote about Maya's obsession with perception, about Franklin's subtle power plays, about Jeanette's weaponized silence. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. Anyone who lived a life where love felt transactional would recognize the characters. I wasn't the one hiding. I wasn't the one afraid of being ordinary. They were. And they buried that fear under designer clothes, exclusive parties, and curated captions. I didn't embarrass the family. I just stopped letting them hide how embarrassing they already were. I hit post. There was no adrenaline rush. No surge of satisfaction. Just stillness. I sat back, folded my arms, and stared at the screen. For a moment, I didn't feel anything at all. Then I realized what it was: freedom. Not because I'd hurt someone or exposed anything, but because I'd finally said the thing I'd been holding in my throat for years. The responses came quickly again. People nodded in solidarity. Others shared how they tried to earn love from people who only understood loyalty as leverage. But this time, I didn't read every comment. I didn't need validation. I already knew. Maya called later that evening. I watched her name light up my phone first once, then twice, then a third time. I didn't answer. She didn't leave a voicemail. A few minutes later, I saw her name in my inbox. She'd sent an email. Subject, enough. Her message was 3 lines. You've embarrassed this family enough. You've made your point. Stop now. That was it. No apology. No self-reflection. Just a command cloaked in wounded pride. I hit reply. No. I just stopped letting you pretend I was the problem. I clicked send and then blocked her email. Then Franklin texted. Just a single word. Wow. Blocked. Then Jeanette. A paragraph long. Guilt wrapped in concern, trying to paint me as ungrateful, as unstable. Blocked. There was a time when I would have spiraled after each of those messages. When I would have second-guessed myself. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I should have handled it privately. Maybe I was making things worse. But not anymore. They weren't angry because I lied. They were angry because I told the truth out loud. I stepped outside that night, hoodie pulled up, hands in my pockets. The street was quiet, moonlight stretching over the pavement. I walked a few blocks to clear my head, though it didn't really need clearing anymore. Just breathing. Just space. When I came back, I passed my mailbox, then stopped. Inside was a small envelope. No return address. I opened it right there under the streetlight. Inside was a single card. On the front, to the one who finally said it. No signature. No message. Just a folded $100 bill. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe someone from the post. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe no one important at all. But the gesture said everything. We saw you. We believed you. We're rooting for you. I tucked the bill in my wallet and tossed the card. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it to matter forever. That's what healing looked like now, taking what you need and letting go of the rest. I walked back upstairs, barefoot now, lighter than I'd felt in months. No more performing. No more waiting to be seen. I was never the embarrassment. I was the evidence. It started like most messages do, quietly, without ceremony. A small buzz against the counter, a notification lighting up my phone screen in the dim kitchen. The words didn't shout, but they might as well have exploded. My son is in the emergency room. I sent it to Tessa, my wife of 5 years, the woman I'd moved mountains for, the woman I'd given everything to: resources, shelter, status. A woman who had once vowed to love not just me, but everything that came with me, including Milo. I didn't expect a flood of sympathy. We'd been distant lately, emotionally parallel, like two neighbors on opposite sides of a long fence. But what I got back, that was worse than distance. It was ice. I'm busy with my parents. We're having a barbecue party. That was it. No follow-up. No. Is he okay? No. What hospital? No heart. No humanity. Just smoke, music, and meat skewers. That's what took precedence over my son having a seizure. Then, as if salt was required for the wound, her mother's voice crackled through in the background. I hadn't even realized she was on speaker until her words landed, smug and soaked in that same smoky bravado. That boy's always sick. Maybe if his father did a better job raising him. It was like someone drove a nail into my chest. Not fast. Not clean. Slow. Deep. My hands went still. My face didn't contort in anger. There were no tears. Just a strange, quiet stillness. Like the moment water turns to ice. A final kind of cold. I looked at Milo, asleep on the hospital bed, hooked to monitors, a faint rhythm blipping on the screen above him. He'd been brave. He always was. My little fighter. My little boy. And I was tired of fighting alone. I picked up my phone again. Not to respond. Not to argue. I learned that words didn't work on people who treated love like a loan and respect like a bargaining chip. No, I went somewhere else. My banking apps, my asset manager, the admin dashboard for my company's fleet account. The house Tessa and I shared? My name was the only one on the deed. I remembered when we closed on it, how Frida boasted about how well-connected her daughter was to have landed a man who could afford such a place. Funny, they never mentioned that when dismissing me as just a single dad with baggage. The Benz her father drove? Leased through my company. The cards they used for emergency groceries, luxury spa days, and the occasional lavish dinner? All co-signed by me. They were extensions of my goodwill. And I was about to cut the power. In 10 minutes, it was done. I called the bank, froze the cards, logged into the dealership account, triggered the repossession flag on the Benz, opened the property tax portal and notified them of an impending deed transfer, except it wouldn't be to Tessa. It wasn't rage. I didn't feel like a man unleashing fury. I felt like a man flipping off the light switch in a room no one thanked him for illuminating. Back in the hospital, Milo stirred. His eyes opened slowly, glassy but conscious. I squeezed his hand. "Hey, champ," I whispered. "You're gonna be okay." He blinked up at me. "Is Tessa coming?" That question gutted me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I lied. "She's at the store. Getting you something." I think even he knew it was a lie, but he smiled anyway. That's the kind of kid Milo is. Always giving people one more chance to be better. But I was done giving. Tessa texted again, 2 hours later. "Did you need me to bring anything?" No apology. No rush. Just a hollow offer coated in casual indifference. I didn't reply. What could I say that hadn't already been screamed in silence? By the time the nurse told me Milo would be discharged the next morning, I had already decided. I would not be married to someone who treated my son like an afterthought. I would not pay another dime to uphold a system that devalued the very thing I cherished most. I stood beside Milo's bed, watched the monitors slow their beeping. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I was clear. This wasn't just the night my son had a health scare. This was the night I left the marriage emotionally, financially, spiritually. I hadn't packed a bag, hadn't signed papers. But the break had already happened. Not in fire. In frost. And frost never screams when it kills. When I first met Tessa, I thought I'd found home. Not just in her, though. Yes, her laugh had a kind of shimmer that made you believe the world was lighter with her in it. But in everything that surrounded her. Her parents, Frida and Winston, were polished and presentable, the kind of couple who always smelled like fresh coffee and high expectations. They wore their privilege like tailored suits, sharp, expensive, but always trying too hard to look casual. I mistook the performance for warmth. I mistook their photo-perfect smiles for inclusion. But the illusion cracked fast. I didn't notice at first. Love has a way of blurring sharp edges. The first holiday dinner we hosted as a couple, Milo had just turned 7. He wore a button-down shirt 2 sizes too big because he said he wanted to dress like a man. He offered Frida a Christmas card he'd made in school, glitter, macaroni, the works. She smiled, but her hand didn't reach for it. Instead, she passed it to Tessa and said, "You keep it. He's yours now, not ours." That was the first tremor. Small, easy to dismiss. Tessa said later, "That's just how she is, old-fashioned." I wanted to believe her. I told myself that time would soften them, that Milo would grow on them like moss on a wall. But walls don't love back. Tessa always insisted they'd come around. "They're not used to blended families," she said. "Give them a chance." So I gave them years of chances. Every awkward dinner, every underhanded comment, every dismissive glance they shot my son, I swallowed it. For her. For the idea that maybe one day Milo would be treated like he mattered. But that day never came. The night of Milo's seizure, I was in the ER clutching his hand, trying not to let him see how badly my own hands were shaking. His body had gone stiff in my arms when it happened. One moment he was watching cartoons on the couch, the next his cup dropped, his eyes rolled back, and I was dialing 911 with the kind of speed that only terror can teach. I didn't wait to see who would show up for us. I texted Tessa anyway. I still had some hope flickering inside me then, like a pilot light that hadn't quite gone out. I told her what happened, that we were in the emergency room, that I needed her. Not just to show up, but to care. And she replied that she was busy, having a barbecue. The message was so absurd it almost didn't compute at first. I read it twice, then a third time. And when I heard her mother's voice in the background dismissing Milo's condition as some ongoing inconvenience, it all snapped into focus. I wasn't part of their family. I was a means to an end. A wallet with arms. A driver who helped them get to their destinations but was never invited inside. And Milo? He was the proof. They didn't just ignore him. They erased him. It was all smoke and mirrors. They looked like a family, acted like one when the cameras were on, but when it came to doing the actual work, showing up, caring, stepping in, they vanished. They grilled ribs while I held my son's limp hand. They laughed while I signed hospital forms and whispered promises into his ear, telling him he'd be okay, even though I was praying just as hard to believe it myself. That night, as the nurse dimmed the lights and Milo finally slept, I leaned back in the hard plastic chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, each one like a blank answer to a question I'd stopped asking. This wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was a contract. And I was ready to cancel the terms. When Tessa walked in the next morning, smelling faintly of smoked meat and cheap wine, I didn't even rise from the chair. She looked tired but untouched, like someone who'd spent a night avoiding responsibility. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us had learned to speak on my behalf. She knelt beside the bed, looked at Milo, and said, "He looks better." "He's stable," I said flatly. She nodded, then whispered, "You should have told me it was this serious." "I did," I replied. "You just didn't care enough to believe me." We didn't argue. That's what made it worse. There was nothing to debate. Just truth, hanging in the air like the sterile scent of antiseptic. I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not mad you weren't there," I said. "I'm done pretending you ever would be." She blinked fast. "What does that mean?" "It means the mirrors are broken," I said. "And there's too much smoke to breathe." Tessa walked into the house like nothing had happened. The front door swung open, and there she was, wearing the same blue sundress she wore when she left for her parents' barbecue, her hair loosely tied back, strands escaping like they had stories of their own. She looked refreshed, maybe even a little too carefree, as if the night hadn't swallowed me whole. She paused in the hallway, staring at the cold plate of untouched takeout on the counter, then turned toward me, smiling faintly. "You made dinner?" I didn't blink. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, waiting to see if any of this was going to register. If the silence, the tension, the crack in the air would tell her something was wrong. But she just stood there, shrugging off her purse like she hadn't ignored a text about my son being in the hospital. "No," I said finally. "I canceled it." She raised an eyebrow, walking further into the room. "Canceled what?" "Your parents' mortgage," I said calmly. "The Benz lease. The credit cards. All of it." That stopped her. Her eyes widened, the slow kind of realization trickling through her face like ink bleeding through paper. "You can't just do that." "I can," I said, my voice as steady as the granite beneath our kitchen island. And I did. She didn't speak at first. I could see the gears turning, fast and loud behind her eyes. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about understanding. It was about logistics. what this meant for her. She hadn't asked about Milo. Not once. The boy she once called her little buddy. The boy she promised to protect like her own. "You're being dramatic," she said finally, her arms folding across her chest. "No," I replied, standing now, slowly, because the weight of it all deserved intention. "I'm being done." She looked almost hurt, but not by the right thing. Not by what happened to Milo. Not by the complete absence of empathy from her family, but by the financial plug being pulled, by the comfort being challenged. "For 5 years, I've paid for everything," I said. "Groceries, vacations, your parents' overdue bills, even the down payment on Monica's condo. I did all that without complaint." Tessa swallowed, her jaw tightening. "And for what?" I continued. "For them to insult my son while you let them? For them to treat him like he's disposable? While you stand there with ribs on your breath and pretend it never happened? You're twisting this," she snapped. "You're punishing them for something they didn't mean." "They meant it," I cut in. "They've always meant it. You just chose to ignore it." She took a step back like my words had pushed her. "You're overreacting." "No," I said again. "I'm waking up." There was no shouting. No slammed doors. Just the flat thud of years of silent tolerance falling away. I realized I'd spent half a decade trying to earn a seat at a table where I was only ever served scraps. I dressed up for dinners with people who thought my son was a charity case. I smiled through toasts that subtly erased him from every family narrative. Tessa looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was. But that wasn't new. She'd been doing that since Milo came into the picture fully. Since I started saying no to weekend visits with her family when I saw how he was treated. Since I became a father first and a convenient husband second. She stepped forward. "We need to talk about this calmly." "No," I said. "We need to talk about it honestly." Her eyes flicked toward the stairs, toward the room where Milo was sleeping. Recovered now, thankfully, but still fragile. Still quiet in the way kids get after they've seen too much, felt too deeply. "I get it," she said, her voice suddenly softer. "You're upset. But this isn't how families work. You don't just shut everything off." "That's exactly how it works when there's no respect," I said. "Because respect is the minimum. Love doesn't excuse abuse. Family doesn't excuse neglect." There was a silence then. Deep. Hollow. The kind that fills up a room so tightly it chokes the oxygen out of it. "You said you'd always take care of me," she whispered. "I did," I replied. "And for too long. That included everyone else you let bleed me dry. But not anymore." She stared at me, trembling slightly, but still not crying. Tessa didn't cry for pain. She cried for consequence. And maybe, deep down, she knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I walked past her to the living room, picked up a small stack of envelopes from the side table, statements, bills, balances she never once asked about. I held them out. "This," I said, "was my mistake. Thinking love means sponsorship. Thinking partnership meant silence." She didn't take them, just stared. I set the stack down and walked upstairs to check on Milo. She didn't follow. By morning, the damage had circulated like gossip in a small town. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't made a scene, hadn't screamed into the void, but I didn't have to. Tessa must have called someone in a panic. Or maybe her parents noticed the halted payments, the declined cards, the sudden realization that the life they were coasting through wasn't on autopilot. It was running on fuel they never paid for. My fuel? Winston was the first to call. 8:15 on the dot. He always had this thing about starting the day with action. Today, that action was yelling into my ear like I was a disobedient employee. "You can't just pull the plug like that," he barked. "Not even a good morning." I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the steam curl upward like the smoke they'd basked in the night before, while my son lay pale in a hospital bed. I let the silence sit for a second before answering. "You're right," I said calmly. "I should have done it sooner. You selfish son of a..." Click. I hung up. Not out of anger. Not even for drama. I just didn't know him the performance anymore. I had spent 5 years swallowing disrespect in the name of peace, and the cost had added up, dollar by dollar, insult by insult. Today, the debt was due. And I was done subsidizing their sense of entitlement. The text came next. First from Tessa, short, nervous ones. "Did you freeze Mom's credit card? They're saying the car is going to be repossessed. Can we talk before this gets worse?" Worse? As if this was just a misunderstanding. As if I was burning down something precious. The truth was, the fire had already been lit. It was just that no one had bothered to look past the smoke until now. Then came Monica. Her message was longer, meaner. Wow, you're seriously unhinged. This is what happens when people like you get money. You think you're a king or something. But guess what? You're not even blood. Milo's not even their grandkid. Get over it. I read it once. Then again. Then I locked my phone and set it down before I cracked the screen. That one stung, not because it was a surprise, but because it confirmed what I'd always feared. They didn't just dislike Milo. They didn't see him at all. In their eyes, he wasn't part of the tree. He was a fallen leaf someone had stepped over on their way to the grill. It was never about a barbecue. It was about priorities. It was about who mattered when no one was watching. And for them, my son had never been on the list. The irony was thick. The only time I was considered family was when I was paying like one. When my money paid for vacations, for spa days, for overdue dental work and holiday decor. When it came time for hugs or photos, Milo and I became shadows in the corner, barely acknowledged. They'd talk about family traditions, but never let him hang the ornaments. They toasted milestones, but he was never in the pictures. At every gathering, they made sure he knew. He wasn't theirs. So no, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt awake. And honestly, it was quiet. Refreshing. Like finally opening a window in a smoke-filled room. Tessa tried calling later that afternoon. I let it ring out. Instead, I went for a walk with Milo. He was doing better. Tired, yes, but stronger. The seizure had passed, but the emotional weight still lingered in his posture. He asked me if we were going to visit them again. Do you want to? I asked, keeping my voice even. He shook his head. They don't really like me there. I stopped walking and knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. It's not your job to be liked by people who can't see how amazing you are. He nodded slowly, and I saw it click, something small and quiet in his chest. Like he'd been holding that truth inside, waiting for someone to say it out loud. We walked on, past the neighborhood park, past the corner store with the bell on the door, past the illusion I'd lived in for years. When we got back home, I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Nothing fancy, but Milo said it was the best meal he'd had in weeks. We ate on the couch with a blanket over our laps, cartoons playing softly in the background. Meanwhile, the phone kept buzzing in the other room. I didn't check it. I knew what it was: more guilt, more deflection, more desperation disguised as outrage. But I was done breathing in their smoke. Let the bridges burn. I wasn't crossing back over them anyway. A week passed before I went back. Not to make amends, there was nothing left to mend, but to collect what was still mine. A few suits. Some tools I had left in the garage. Milo's sketchbooks. The rest of it could rot there, absorbed by that sterile house with its fake warmth and curated civility. Tessa said she'd be at her parents'. I didn't ask why. I assumed she needed space, either to process or to let Frida and Winston coach her on how to handle me now that the gold had stopped flowing. Either way, I didn't care. I wanted in and out. Quiet, fast, no confrontation. The house was exactly as I remembered, but colder. The walls had always been white, but now they looked bleached of life. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and silence. I walked through the hallway, toward the closet in the guest room, our guest room, technically, but the one I'd started sleeping in more often. That quiet decision we never acknowledged. Me drifting further from her side of the bed, then eventually out of the bed altogether. 1 inch at a time until even our breathing no longer aligned. The hallway was lined with photos. It always had been. The Dalton family legacy. Smiles caught mid-laugh, posed brunches, graduation day snaps. There was Monica in her wedding dress, beaming next to a man who'd cheated on her twice by the honeymoon. There was Tessa, mortarboard tilted on her perfect hair, flanked by her parents, Frida's lipstick red and loud, Winston looking like he belonged in a cigar commercial. There were nieces and nephews. A beach photo with someone's golden retriever. Even their family friend Dwight, holding up a fish from a lake trip I wasn't invited to. But not one picture of me. Not one of Milo. Not even a blurry background image where we'd been cropped in or out. I stood there, numb at first, then hollow, then something deeper, something that scraped against the ribs. I leaned closer, scanning the rows again. Surely, I had missed something. A frame tucked in the corner? A side table display? Anything? Nothing. 5 years. Dozens of visits. Birthdays. Holidays. And not one visual acknowledgement that I ever existed in their world. I remembered the time Milo had drawn a picture of the whole family. Stick figures. He labeled them me, Tessa, himself. Even the dog we almost adopted. And he added Frida and Winston, because he wanted to be kind. He asked if we could hang it in their hallway. I had smiled and said, maybe next time. I should have told him the truth. Milo had asked once, softly, during a holiday dinner where no one refilled his juice glass, how come there's no picture of us here? I told him, they just haven't printed one yet. What a lie. The kind of lie parents tell when they want to shield their children from the ugliness of the world. When they hope the love they give is enough to outshine the love withheld by others. I wanted to believe that if I kept pretending, if I kept paying, they'd eventually change. But people don't change for comfort. They change when it costs them something to stay the same. I turned from the wall and walked to the guest room. Packed my duffel with clothes. Found Milo's sketchbooks in the bottom drawer where Tessa had stashed them during one of her clean sweeps. One of them was open to a page he'd drawn of our living room, me asleep on the couch and curled beside me. The caption in his handwriting said, "Home is here." I took that one, put it carefully in the bag. On my way out, I passed the kitchen and noticed the mail pile. A bill from the spa Frida frequented. A loan statement from Winston's watch purchase. All in my name. All neatly arranged like I'd be coming back to pay them. I placed them in the trash. I didn't take any of the framed photos from the wall. That wasn't my job. My presence never lived there anyway. But before I stepped out, I opened one drawer, the sideboard where Tessa kept old picture prints and extra frames. I knew she once kept a picture of me and Milo there. The day we built his first Lego ship. A goofy grin on his face, a smudge of chocolate on mine. Pure. Real. It was gone. Replaced by more prints of beach days and brunches I never attended. That was the final answer I didn't know I'd come looking for. This wasn't just a family I'd married into. It was a stage. And we were never part of the script. I left the house without looking back. Slammed nothing. Broke nothing. But as I closed the door behind me, I knew what I had just done wasn't walking out. It was waking up. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and quiet, the kind of day where even the birds seemed to keep their opinions to themselves. Milo was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a cartoon playing at low volume. He hadn't said much since we got home from the hospital. He was healing, but there was a silence in him that hadn't been there before. A new kind of stillness I didn't like. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, but I picked it up anyway. I'd had enough silence for the week. Is Milo okay? That voice, firm, familiar, and laced with urgency. Sharon. Tessa's aunt by blood. My ex-wife's sister by law. But in truth, the only person from that whole web of family who had ever looked at my son and seen him. Not as a footnote. Not as a burden. As a boy. As a child. As a human being. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I said. He's better. Still recovering. There was a pause. I heard what happened, not from Tessa. Monica posted something stupid about losing perks. I figured something bigger went down. I sighed, sitting at the edge of the couch, my hand resting on Milo's blanket-covered foot. Bigger is one word for it. Another pause. Then, I'm coming over. She didn't ask. She didn't offer politely. She just said it and meant it. 20 minutes later, she was knocking on the door with a bag of homemade soup and a tin of those weird little breadsticks Milo liked from that Italian deli across town. Her husband Greg followed behind her, balancing a stack of comic books like he was carrying gold. They didn't even hesitate. Sharon walked right in and knelt by the couch, brushing the hair from Milo's forehead like she'd done it 100 times. Greg sat cross-legged on the floor, laying out the comics like it was Christmas morning. Milo's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in days. And me? I just stood there, taking in the scene like a man witnessing something sacred. No lecture. No backhanded questions. No, well, maybe he's overreacting. Just soup. Comic books. And presents. You hungry? Sharon asked him. He nodded. She headed to the kitchen without waiting for permission. I heard cabinets open, a pot set down, the hum of familiarity that only comes from someone who sees your home as theirs not because of entitlement, but because of love. I leaned against the wall, watching Greg hold up a copy of The Flash and read it aloud with voices. Milo giggled, that real kind of laugh, the kind that doesn't stop at the mouth but spills out of the chest. It caught me off guard. That sound, that warmth. Like color seeping back into a washed-out world. Sharon came back with a steaming bowl, blue on the surface, and handed it to Milo herself. Then she looked at me. Not with pity. Not with judgment. With clarity. She didn't ask what happened with Tessa. She didn't need the whole story. She already understood. I remember when Rena left, she said quietly, sitting beside me now. People thought I was crazy for still checking in on you. Said I shouldn't mind my lane. But I saw what you did for that boy. That was always enough for me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. She rested a hand on my shoulder. You don't owe anyone explanations. You did what needed doing. I looked at her, voice low. It just hurts. I thought I was building something solid. And now, I'm not even sure what's left. She smiled gently. You are what's left. You and him. That's enough. Greg chimed in from the floor. We're gonna come by every week, all right? Comic drop-offs, soup rotation, whatever. Milo's got us. Milo beamed, mouth full of noodles, and gave a dramatic thumbs up. I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. That's when it clicked. Family isn't a bloodline. It's not who's listed on a tree or who shares a last name. It's not who shows up in the photos or makes the loudest toast. Family is who shows up, who brings soup without being asked, who sits on the floor with comics because they know a child needs to smile again. I had spent so long trying to impress the wrong people, trying to earn a space in a house that was never built to include me. But right here, in this living room, with the smell of soup and the sound of paper flipping and laughter bubbling over the edges of grief, this was family. This was enough. When they left that night, Milo hugged Sharon so tightly her glasses nearly fell off. Greg tousled his hair and promised to return with the next volume and possibly some gummy worms. I watched them drive off with headlights cutting through the dusk. I closed the door and turned to Milo, who was now lying on the floor, a comic covering his face. He pulled it down and grinned. That was awesome. Yeah, I said. It really was. And for the first time in months, I meant it. Tessa came back 2 days later. No warning. No polite knock. Just the familiar sound of her keys twisting in the lock, like she still had permission to walk in without asking. I was sitting at the dining table with Milo, working through his math worksheet. He was focused, tongue poking out in concentration, tapping his pencil against his cheek as he tried to remember how to multiply fractions. The moment the door opened, he stiffened. His pencil froze midair. I watched the tension crawl up his shoulders like vines. Tessa stepped inside slowly, dressed down, no makeup, hair pulled into a messy bun, hoodie and jeans instead of her usual curated perfection. She looked unarmored, but not apologetic. I stood up. Hey, bud, I said softly. Go finish this in your room, okay? He looked at me, then at her, then nodded and slipped away without a word. She closed the door behind her and didn't move any further. She just stood there, fingers clenching the strap of her bag. I've been staying at my parents', she started, voice hoarse. I figured, I said. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't move to make coffee or small talk. I wasn't going to cushion this moment. Not anymore. I needed time to think. You've had years. She flinched. It was small, but it was there. A ripple in the perfect surface she always tried to present. You're really going through with this? She asked. Freezing them out? Leaving me? I'm not freezing anyone out, I said. I'm walking away from disrespect. That's not the same thing. Her eyes brimmed. She took a shaky breath. You're abandoning my family. That word, abandoning, it hit like a slap. I stepped toward her, slowly, deliberately. Not aggressive. Just grounded. No, I said. Your family abandoned my son. Again. And again. And you let them. I didn't. You did. My voice rose, not in volume, but in certainty. You stood by. You watched them talk around him, exclude him, insult him. And instead of standing up for him, you told me to give them time. Like he was some inconvenience they'd eventually grow to tolerate. She shook her head, tears slipping now. I didn't know how to handle it. I was scared. I didn't want to make things worse. You didn't want to make them uncomfortable, I said. But you didn't mind making us small. You chose their comfort over our dignity. She sank into a chair finally, arms wrapped around herself like she could hold in the unraveling. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I sat across from her, hands folded. Tessa, this isn't just about the barbecue. It's about years of silence. Years of you watching them treat Milo like a second-class guest in his own life. And I kept thinking, maybe next holiday, maybe next visit, maybe she'll finally say something. But you never did. I thought if I kept the peace. You weren't keeping peace. You were preserving appearances. There's a difference. She wiped her eyes and looked at me with something close to desperation. I was scared they'd disown me. I let the words hang in the air for a second. Then maybe they should have. She blinked. What? If they were willing to disown you for standing up for a child, your stepson, then they already disowned decency. You just hadn't noticed yet. She crumbled then. Not just tears collapse. Shoulders hunched, face buried in her hands, sobs shuddering out of her like she was coming apart. But it wasn't grief. It was shame. Maybe guilt. Or maybe just the realization that the person she pretended to be, this strong, modern woman with backbone and heart, had never really existed in this story. Not when it counted. I didn't reach for her. I didn't offer comfort. That used to be my role. Buffer, fixer, forgiver. But I'd retired that job. I'd already been enough things to people who gave nothing back. After a while, she calmed down enough to speak again. Are you going to divorce me? I didn't answer right away. I looked toward the hallway where Milo had gone, where I knew he was quietly listening from the crack in the door. I always forgot how much kids hear. I've already called a lawyer, I said finally. We're discussing next steps. She didn't fight it. She didn't beg. That was the most revealing part. Deep down, she knew this was coming. She just hadn't believed I'd follow through. You loved me, she said, not as a question but a memory. I did, I said. But love without respect? That's just slow heartbreak. And I'm done bleeding for people who wouldn't even call the hospital. She didn't say anything after that. She left 15 minutes later. Quietly. No slamming doors. No second goodbye. Just the sound of footsteps moving away, for once, not mine. And for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like air. It had been 2 weeks since I severed the last of the financial ties. 2 weeks of silence from the Dalton household. No visits, no texts from Tessa, no guilt-soaked voicemails. Just the occasional echo in my inbox from banks and creditors now knocking on the doors they used to assume I'd keep open. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd let the silence grow into acceptance. That they'd lick their wounds in private and move on. I underestimated how quickly desperation eats away at pride. The message came late on a Thursday. Not a text. A phone call. From Winston's number. I hesitated before answering. I didn't want another tirade. I wasn't interested in rage or revisionist history. But a part of me was curious. What did the patriarch of a crumbling financial facade sound like when the lights started shutting off? I picked up. At first, nothing. Just the quiet inhale of someone trying to decide how much of themselves to put into a plea. Then, finally, they're going to repossess the car. His voice was soft. Not angry. Not condescending. Just tired. The way a man sounds when he's realizing that the world no longer turns because he says it should. I said nothing. And Frida's blood pressure meds aren't covered anymore. They dropped us. You know how tight things have been. Tight, I echoed. You mean all those spa days? Or the annual ski trip where I got a souvenir mug while you booked a suite I paid for? That's not fair, he snapped, the old tone trying to claw its way back. But even he didn't believe it. We didn't think you'd stop paying your bills? I cut in. No. You didn't think I'd grow a spine. He sighed. Look, I know things got heated. Emotions ran high. I actually laughed. You mean when your wife implied my son's seizures were because I was a bad parent? That kind of emotional. There was a pause. Long waited. But still, no apology. Be reasonable, he said eventually. We're family. And there it was. The word they only remembered when their accounts ran dry. No, Winston, I said, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as Milo hummed softly in the next room. You're not family. You're a series of transactions dressed up in Sunday manners. And the account is closed. You're punishing all of us for something Frida said. I'm holding all of you accountable for everything you allowed. For every room you let my son walk into and feel like he didn't belong. For every time you looked through him instead of at him. And for every time you leaned on me without offering a damn ounce of decency in return. I didn't know it had gotten this bad, he said. You knew. You just didn't care until the Benz was on a tow truck. He had the audacity to chuckle, a hollow little sound. I'll admit, we may have taken your support for granted. Support, I repeated. You mean me paying off your mortgage arrears while Frida told her friends I was just a single father with lucky timing? That kind of support. He didn't respond. Maybe he was out of excuses. Or maybe he was finally choking on the taste of his own self-importance. Then he said it. We just want peace. And I shook my head slowly, smiling sadly to myself. Peace, I said, isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of respect. You never gave me either. What you want is silence. Submission. A return to how it was when I was useful and quiet. That's not true, he said. It is. And you know it. And if Frida's blood pressure's up now, that's not my doing. That's years of entitlement finally hitting a wall. He tried again. Don't do this for Milo's sake. One day, he'll want to know his family. He already knows them, I said. He knows who showed up, Who brought him soup? Who read him comics on the floor? And none of them share your last name. That ended the conversation. I hung up, not out of rage, but out of clarity. Winston didn't call because he missed us. He called because the bill had arrived, and for the first time, it had his name on it. I looked over at Milo, who had just walked in holding one of the comics Greg had brought. He was smiling, asking if we could read together. I scooped him up onto the couch, pulled a blanket over us, and nodded. That was my peace. That was my family. And I didn't owe another cent to anyone who didn't know how to protect either. It was Sunday morning. Quiet, slow, and cool enough to leave the windows open. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee, the sound of the machine humming gently while bacon sizzled on the stove. Milo sat at the dining table with colored pencils spread out in front of him, his small fingers smudged with red and green. He was working on a school project, his family tree. I hadn't asked many questions. I figured it was just another worksheet, another class display that would hang in a hallway for parent-teacher night. But something about how quiet he was being drew me over. I walked around the island and leaned slightly, peering over his shoulder. He'd started at the top. Sharon and Greg. Two smiling stick figures, holding hands, with a golden star drawn above their heads. Below them, a branch connected to me, and beside me, Rena, his biological mom. There were more lines, smaller figures. And then, right at the bottom center, was Milo. Smiling. Big head, tiny body. Arms stretched like he was hugging the whole tree from the roots. I blinked. My heart swelled, then twisted. No Tessa. No Frida. No Winston. No Monica. Just the people who'd shown up. Is this everyone? I asked softly, crouching beside him so I was eye level. He looked up and nodded without hesitation. Yeah, I didn't want to put people I don't really know. I studied his face. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger. Just certainty. The same kind I'd felt recently, raw, rooted, real. You're okay with that? I asked gently. He nodded again. They didn't come to the hospital. Sharon did. Greg did. They bring soup. They come to our house. That's family, right? God. I had to look away for a second. His words, spoken so plainly, cut through years of confusion I'd allowed to cloud my own thinking. He wasn't just drawing a tree. He was redrawing truth. From scratch. With crayons and unfiltered honesty. I nodded. Yeah, bud. That's exactly what family is. He smiled wide. Can you help me draw you better? Your arms are weird. I laughed through the lump in my throat and picked up a pencil. Sure. Let's fix those arms. We worked on it together. Added more details. Greg's glasses. Sharon's earrings. Rena's bright lipstick that Milo always noticed. We added the dog Greg and Sharon were fostering. Milo insisted the dog counted too. It was one of those rare moments where time felt irrelevant. Just a father and son, pencils and paper, and the rebuilding of identity happening in real time. Later that afternoon, Milo taped the finished tree to the fridge. He looked at it like it was sacred. I looked at it like it was proof. That evening, we went for a walk. Just the two of us, hand in hand, the way we used to when he was small and everything felt larger than life. We passed by the park, the school, the little bakery we sometimes stopped at for cinnamon rolls. He tugged my arm. Can we send a picture of the tree to Sharon? Yeah, I said. That's a great idea. She'll like it, he said with certainty. She'll be proud. And that was it, that word. Proud. Frida had never said it. Not once. Not even when Milo brought home perfect grades or won the reading competition. Tessa had said it, sure, but only in the way people say it because they're supposed to. But Sharon? Sharon said it and meant it. Every single time. When we got home, I took a photo of the family tree and texted it to Sharon. Her reply came 10 minutes later. This just made me cry. Can I print this and hang it on our wall? I showed Milo, and he beamed. Told you she'd love it. You sure you don't want to include Tessa? I asked carefully. It's okay if you do. He shook his head without pause. I used to, but I waited a long time for her to come around. And she didn't. So, I stopped waiting. There was no hate in his voice. Just wisdom. The kind that shouldn't belong to a 10-year-old, but somehow did. I don't hate her, he added. But she doesn't feel like part of this anymore. And he pointed to the tree. His truth. That night, he went to bed early. Tired from the sun, from the drawing, from the clarity. I stood in the kitchen with the fridge lights spilling over the linoleum, staring at that piece of paper. It was messy, colorful, childlike, and absolutely perfect. Because it told the truth. For years, I had believed that love was something you fought to keep, even when it didn't fight back. That family was defined by names and rings and proximity. But Milo, my boy, my mirror, had seen through all of it. He had built his family tree the way we should all build our lives. Not by blood, but by presence. It came full circle with a phone call. A voice I hadn't heard in weeks, Frida's. Her number flashed across the screen like a bad habit I'd finally broken but hadn't deleted. I hesitated. I didn't want more excuses, more gaslighting dressed up as concern. But something in me, maybe the part that still wanted finality, answered. Her voice was different this time. Not cold, not sharp, just empty. "Winston's sick," she said. "The stress has gotten to him. And Monica moved out. She's back with that idiot from college. We're drowning." I didn't respond right away. I stared out the living room window, watched the wind stir the branches of the oak tree in our front yard, and let the silence hold for once. "I thought you should know," she continued, "since you are, part of the family." I let that word hang in the air. Are. Like she couldn't decide which tense to use. I finally said, "So was I, and none of you cared." Her breath hitched. We didn't realize how far things had gone. No, they never did. Because they never looked past their own needs, their own comfort, their own expectations of what I was supposed to provide without asking for anything in return. "You didn't call when Milo was in the ER," I said, steady. "You didn't visit, didn't text. But now that your life is unraveling, suddenly I'm worth dialing again." "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. "You meant it exactly like that," I said. "And that's the problem." She went quiet for a while. I could hear something clinking in the background. Maybe a spoon against a mug. Maybe her wedding ring tapping the table like it used to when she was impatient during dinners. "You were always the stable one," she said eventually. "The one who held things together." "I was the convenient one," I corrected. "The one who paid and stayed quiet." Her voice cracked then. "But we're still family." "No," I said, calm and final. "We were a transaction, and that account is closed." There was nothing left to argue. No more roles to pretend. No more borrowed titles like son-in-law or uncle. Just the truth, ugly and clean. I ended the call. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't want one. Then I blocked the number. The world didn't shake. The sky didn't fall. But something inside me lifted. That invisible weight that had followed me for years. This dull ache of responsibility for people who never reciprocated, evaporated. It was gone. And in its place, there was peace. Not loud. Not triumphant. Just steady. That night, Milo and I went to Greg's birthday dinner. It was nothing fancy, just a backyard gathering at their place with string lights tangled in the branches, folding tables draped in checkered cloths, and a dozen people who actually wanted to be there. Sharon had baked one of her famous cakes, chocolate fudge with caramel swirls. The kind of cake that required zero occasion, but made every occasion feel bigger. When we walked in, Greg called out, "There's my co-pilot," and scooped Milo into a dramatic one-armed hug. Milo laughed so hard he dropped the card he made, which Greg picked up like it was a golden award. Sharon raised a toast a little later. She tapped her glass and waited for the chatter to settle. When it did, she smiled. One of those deep, knowing smiles, and said, "To Greg, and to family, not the kind we're born into, but the kind we build." Then she looked at me, and to the people who choose to show up. Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The table clinked glasses. Milo took a sip of his milk, then laughed so hard at something Greg whispered that it came right out of his nose. He tried to cover it with a napkin, but it was too late. Everyone was laughing, him most of all. I hadn't seen him laugh like that in months. That carefree kind of joy. The kind that says I'm safe here. And I realized something right then. This was the ending I didn't know I needed. Not revenge. Not vindication. Just release. A goodbye. Not to people, but to guilt. To the belief that I had to keep proving myself to those who'd already decided I wasn't enough. To the weight of trying to make a child feel welcome in a house where he was only ever tolerated. To the lie that family is duty, no matter the cost. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had something better. Laughter. Love. Presence. Not bought. Not forced. Earned. Milo reached over, tugged at my sleeve, and grinned. "This is the best party ever." "Yeah," I said, ruffling his hair. "It really is." And for the first time in years, I wasn't paying for any of it. I was living in it.